Good afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us for the second session of the Introduction to Zen. Our speaker for today, as we have already had him last month and will be continuing to have Dr. Udayan speak to all of you and the community of the Dhamma Center every month with regards to Zen Buddhism and Zen Buddhist thought and practice, is of course Dr. Udayan Chakrabarti, clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, and also a fellow member of the Board of Trustees of the Dhamma Center. So then I'm not going to take too much of time because everyone is waiting for your talk. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you. Thank you everyone for joining. And also, before I give it completely up to Udayan, if you have any questions, to those of you who are joining us from YouTube and for those of you joining us here on Zoom, if you have any questions, put it down on the chat section, or after Udayan's talk, we'll be opening the session up to any questions that you would be having, so you can ask Udayan directly. So, and I think he'll be glad to answer all of you. Thank you so much, Udayan. Thank you so much, everyone, and over to you, Udayan. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. A very good afternoon to you all.
Udayan, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
A very good afternoon to you all. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Bhante, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you again. So, Fundamentals of Zen Practice Part 2, we'll carry on from where we left off last time. So just a bit of a recap. Zen Buddhism. The word Zen comes from the Chinese Shan, which comes from the Sanskrit Dhyan, which is meditation, the meditation school. And as I mentioned previously, it is a development of Indian Mahayana Zen when it went to China and it sort of fused with the native traditions of China, Confucianism and Taoism. And there's actually a lot of Theravada Buddhism as well. It's not, sometimes people in the West think that Zen is something special of its own. And some of the Zen sort of practitioners, especially in the States, they seem to almost dissociate it from Buddhism completely, which is sad. It is very much a school of Buddhism. It is very much grounded in the basics of the early Buddhism of the Theravadan school, and there is no place for Zen without that. Of course, as happens with all things, different cultures, different countries, they give it their own little inflection on and nuances. So we start off today with the story of the Sixth Patriarch, who is perhaps after Bodhidharma, who is the supposed founder of Zen. Bodhidharma was the great Indian monk who went to China in the 4th, 5th century. And I remember last time I mentioned his great interview with Emperor Wu, when he said, the profound, vast emptiness, no holiness. Well, after him, the next, so he's regarded as the first patriarch of Shan, or Zen Buddhism, Bodhidharma. And then we had another line of another 4 great masters, and then we come to the 6th patriarch. And from the 6th patriarch onwards, one could say that Shan, Zen, took on a course of its own. It was different from the Indian Buddhism that had been in China already for about 500, 600 odd years or so. And it's very instructive to actually know the story of the 6th patriarch. And in the Mahayana, the sutras, as you know, are the doctrine that was directly spoken by the Lord Buddha. And all the sutras that we have in the Mahayana tradition are directly from Buddha himself. However, This sixth patriarch, he has his own sutra. The sutra is called the Platform Sutra, or the Altar Sutra of the sixth patriarch, because obviously in those days when masters would give talks, they would get onto the platform, a raised platform, or a pulpit from where they'll give their talks. So it's called the Platform Sutra of the sixth patriarch. That shows how important this great man was and still is in the transmission of Zen. So the story goes, the sixth patriarch was an illiterate woodcutter, and his father had died quite early, and he he and his elderly mother, he used to live together, and he used to support her by chopping wood, fetching it from the woods and selling it and making it. That was his living. Very, very simple, humble, poor man, illiterate as well. One day, as he's going to do business with one of the local businessmen where he sells wood, he happens to hear a Buddhist monk outside the shop reciting a verse from the famous Diamond Sutra. Now, the Diamond Sutra is one of the great sutras of highest perfection wisdom. It is part of the Mahayana Mahaprajna Paramita Sutras. These are the wisdom, perfection of wisdom sutras. Prajna Paramita, you have Maha Prajna. Maha means the great, and Prajna is the deep intuitive wisdom, Prajna wisdom, which is much championed in Buddhism. This is not the intellectual wisdom. This is not acquired study knowledge. This is the deep wisdom of the heart, the inherent wisdom, the Buddha nature wisdom, Prajna. And Paramita means, Paramita is from the Sanskrit, the other shore. So the title implies the wisdom that takes us to the other shore. This shore being samsara, the other shore being nirvana. And there were lots of Prajna Paramita sutras. These sutras existed in various forms, in very small form, 100 verses, in 800 verses, 10,000 verses, it goes on. And the Diamond Sutra is from that family of perfection of wisdom sutras. In that, there is a verse and one particular phrase that really struck a chord with the sixth patriarch. His name is Huineng, Master Huineng. In Japanese, he's known as Yeno. And the particular phrase that struck a deep, deep chord with this man who had very little experience of Buddhism, actually. He wasn't a professional monk. He was sincere and humble and devoted and very caring and gentle, but he hadn't actually done any serious amount of formal training, as we say. And the verse in particular was, the phrase was, arouse the mind that abides nowhere. Arouse the mind that abides nowhere. So this is a mind, this is a heart that is free to come and go. So to give an example, something happens to me in my daily life. The boss says something to me, I don't agree with it. Somebody accuses me of something that I didn't do. I was innocent. What do we normally do? We get all into a state about it. How could he say that to me? How dare she? I'm going to show her. And we start a whole series of reactions, don't we? Now, this obviously affects us for the rest of the day, in the rest of my interactions with my other clients, my patients, or whatever, my family, and I carry that thing all day long. And it affects me. If I'm driving back home, it bothers me so much I could end up having an accident. Because the mind that abides nowhere has not been aroused, because what we tend to do is we get stuck on our baggages, on our issues, and we replay it all day long. How am I going to show him next time? This cannot be, I really need to tell them what's good for them, all that kind of stuff. But arouse the mind that abides nowhere. What does that simply mean? Let go. Things happen. If I can change it, change it. If I can't, let go. Let it abide nowhere. Clearly, Huineng must have had some deep resonance with him, because immediately that was a massive conversion experience for him. You could say it was a profound awakening experience for him. And he immediately asked this monk who was reciting the verse outside the shop. We're talking about old China, 1500 odd years ago, when religion was to be seen everywhere. And this Huineng goes up to the monk and says, "What is that book you are reading? Where is it from?" And then the monk explained that it's the Diamond Sutra and that he was a student of the Fifth Patriarch. And Huineng obviously wanted to meet this great man, the Fifth Patriarch, to train, because something had started stirring in his heart. And he knew that he had to go and go deeper into this. So he found out that the Fifth Patriarch was from miles, literally hundreds and miles away from where he was. And he was from the south of the country, where traditionally it was held that there were barbarians, uneducated, uncultured. And he himself was obviously not very educated, illiterate, uncultured. And so he made a determination to go and seek this great master out, to perhaps learn something from him, to take this further. So he made provisions for his elderly mother, and he set off on his long journey. And you can understand, what those journeys back in those days were. It took months. It showed his commitment, his passion for pursuing the truth. So he goes there, and after a long journey, he actually makes it to the temple of the Fifth Patriarch of Zen. He has an interview with the Fifth Patriarch in secrecy. And the Fifth Patriarch knew straight away that there was a special one in his presence. And the Fifth Patriarch, to test him, said, "What are you seeking here?" And the Sixth Patriarch, to be Huineng, he said, "I have come for the Dharma. Please instruct me." And the Fifth Patriarch, rather sarcastically, testing him, you see, said, "You, illiterate, uncultured, coming from the barbarian south, you expect to know the Dharma? What right do you have? What vain travels have you done in vain? You're wasting your time. Go back, look after your elderly mother." And then the young Huineng says, "My lord, yes, indeed, it is true that there are those who are barbarians and some who are cultured and some who are illiterate. But in the Dharma, are not all things equal? Does the Dharma not apply to the north and the south, to the east and the west, to the educated and the illiterate, to the cultured and the uncultured? Does this Dharma not encompass the great way, which includes all things, great and small?" The Fifth Patriarch was truly impressed, and he said to him, You speak too much. Now go and hide yourself. I don't want you near the other monks. Don't forget, Huineng was a layman. And this is a monastery with seasoned monks who had been with the Fifth Patriarch for 10, 20, 25 odd years. So he sent him to the rice mill at the back of the monastery. What happened in those days is you had the monastery with the monks, and you had the local lay people who would come in and help with the various chores of running the monastery. And the rice mill was obviously an important thing. And so the poor Sixth Patriarch was relegated to the rice mill. He was not even allowed into the main monastery. So he couldn't hear any talks or lectures. And he simply was biding his time doing the task allotted to him, which is pounding the heavy mortar and pestle. And in those days, it was quite a serious sort of physical operation. And the Sixth Patriarch was a very light man. So he actually used to tie a heavy bit of stone around his waist so he could actually get the weight to jump onto this fulcrum seesaw thing, so that the rice would be dehusked and all that. And this went on for quite a while. And he was just happy to bide his time there and do what his master had instructed him. Now, the Fifth Patriarch was getting old. And as you probably know, when a Zen transmission happens from master to disciple, in true Buddhist tradition, a gatha, G-A-T-H-A, which is a Sanskrit word for a transmission verse. It's a very terse, brief, usually 4-line verse that reflects one's insight. And in Zen, this is far more important than learning doctrine or theology and quoting the scriptures, because anybody can quote the scriptures, but it's the experience, the insight within, that is the prize, not my ability to recite from a holy scripture or give wonderful talks or whatever. It's the insight within. And so the fifth patriarch had said, I'm getting old and it is time to pass the robe and the bowl on. The robe and the bowl, historically, traditionally, it was said that this robe was inherited from the Buddha himself, and the robe and his begging bowl was passed on from master to disciple through 28 Indian generations, culminating in Bodhidharma, who is the 28th Indian patriarch of Zen and the first patriarch of Chinese Zen. And then it was passed on to the fifth patriarch in succession. And the fifth patriarch is now saying that it is time for me to pass this on, but whoever of you think has any understanding of the way, the Dharma, please compose a verse, come to me, and if it shows that this one has insight, the transmission, the patriarchy would be passed on to that one. So there was obviously a huge commotion in the monastery. All the monks got very excited, and they all naturally assumed the head monk, he will get it, because he had been with the fifth patriarch for years and years, and he was very studious and very sincere, and everybody looked up to him. And even the fifth patriarch appointed him his head monk, obviously, because he had a lot of insight. Now, the head monk, he within himself, however, he lacked confidence. He knew he hadn't cracked the nut, so to speak. He knew there was something incomplete within him. But nevertheless, he is the head monk and he is very sincere. And though his master had not approved him as yet until then, he nevertheless wanted to be tested. So he did eventually do a verse. But because, excuse me, he lacked the confidence, he did not go to the master himself and submit his verse. He actually wrote this verse in a wall approaching the meditation hall. They had this big corridor, and against that corridor there was a massive wall, and there he wrote his little verse. And the verse goes something like this: this body is the bodhi tree, the heart a stand of mirror bright. Take heed to always keep it clean, and let no dust upon it alight. I'll say it one more time. This body is the bodhi tree. The bodhi tree, as you know, bodhi is the Sanskrit for awakening, enlightenment. So this body is the bodhi tree. This body is the tree of enlightenment. And the heart, the mind, chitta in Sanskrit, shin in Chinese, Japanese, shin, the heart a stand of mirror bright. Take heed to always keep it clean, and let no dust upon it alight. Well, that's what practice is all about, isn't it? It's about awareness. It's about keeping the mirror clean and let no dust upon it alight, so that the mirror might reflect all things as they truly are. When the head monk wrote this verse, all the other monks saw it and they're all very excited. Wow, what a verse. Truly the head monk. And they knew straight away it had to be the head monk. The master saw it and he realized immediately the one who had composed this verse had not attained to full insight. He is still trapped within duality, with the separation of body and heart and all that. This is a bit technical. I'll go into it a bit later on, but the master realized straight away that the one who had, and he also knew it was the head monk. So he called the head monk and he told him straight to his face, I'm sorry, you have gone deep, but not deep enough. This poem goes part of the way, but not the full way. And the head monk also knew it, and he thanked his master. And he said, yes, master, truly, I had doubts in myself. And the master said, go back and work on it. I give you another few days and improve this verse. and meditate hard for the next few days and see if you can come out the other way. In the meanwhile, in the rice mill, where the young Huineng, the sixth patriarch to be, was working, he also heard this verse from the other workers. Because as I said, there was a huge commotion all over the monastery complex. And, can you imagine? It was a powerful time. The old man is going into retirement soon, and he's going to pass the robe and bowl on. And for monks, obviously, lay people, it was like the hottest gossip in town. Who is he going to go to give it to? Is the head monk going to get it? What a wonderful verse, blah, blah, blah. Huineng hears the verse, and he knows straight away it is incomplete. And he says to another worker, a junior monk, he says to him, I want to see this verse. Please take me to the wall where this verse is written. And so the young monk takes him there and says, what good will it do to you? You cannot even read or write. He said, no, I want to pay my respects. So he goes there and he tells the young monk to read the verse to him again. He hears it and he says, I have a verse too. Would you mind writing the verse down for me? And the young monk laughs at him. You can't even read or write. You want me to write a verse for you? And the young Huineng says, brother, I may be illiterate and uneducated, but as a Buddhist, should you not at least grant me my right to have my verse expressed? And the young monk realizes how arrogant he was. He says, of course, forgive me, of course. So then Huineng starts his verse, and it goes like this. There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. Since from the beginning all is void, where can the dust alight? One more time. There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. Since from the beginning all is void, where can the dust alight? As soon as the other monk heard this, he realized how profound this was. And suddenly, a lot of other monks came to see this, and they started saying, who is this ignoramus? And how on earth could he have come up with this verse? What is this? They were all shocked. The master got to hear about it, and he came over, and he saw the verse. He quickly wiped it away. And he said, this one too misses the mark. But deep down, that's what he said to the other monks. There was a good reason for this. He then rubbed this second verse away, but he actually kept the head monk's verse intact. Interesting. And he knew deep down that this new verse was by the young man, the barbarian, illiterate young man working in the rice mill. He then went up to see him very late at night so that nobody else could see him. And he said to him, did you write that verse? And Huineng says, yes, my lord, it was I who did it. And then the fifth patriarch asked him a few more questions to just thoroughly test his insight. And Huineng gave all the right answers. And then the master said, right, is the rice ready? And Huineng, this is code language, is the rice ready? Are you ready to take on the great responsibility I'm about to bestow upon you, the robe and bowl? And the Huineng said, oh, the rice was ready a long time ago, my lord. And then the master said, come and meet me in my private quarters at the third watch of night. And there I shall see you for the final time. And then you must leave this monastery, because there are other monks who are very jealous, and they will not leave you in peace. They will think you are an imposter. Because you are not a monk, they will try to do you great harm. So come and meet me in the third watch of night. I shall hand you the robe and the bowl, and you must leave. And so Huineng does that, and the master gives him his final instructions and tells him that he must hide himself for at least 12 years until the whole incident passes and is forgotten. And the master himself takes the young Huineng across out of the monastery gate in the deep night. There was a river nearby, and the master says, to his young protege, I shall ferry you across the river to the other shore, and then I shall come back. And then Huineng told his master, Master, ferrying across is for people who need to be ferried across. I do not need any more ferrying. Let me ferry you. And the master said, no, it is customary practice that I shall ferry you across. And there, as he takes him along, ferrying across the river, he gives him further instructions. And then the master comes back, and we hear no more about the fifth patriarch. The following day, suddenly there's a huge commotion because everybody realizes that the robe and bowl have been transmitted, and they're not sure who it is. Then they eventually realize that the young man is also missing, and everybody begins to suspect that this young man has either inherited it or has run away with it. And a party chased after him, a party of vigorous young monks, all went, ferried across the river and started looking for Huineng. Huineng was gathering pace, but there was one particular senior monk who used to be a military general in his younger days. He was called the Elder Muir, M-Y-O. This man was particularly fierce and vigorous, and he eventually caught up. After quite some time, he caught up with Huineng in a mountain pass. And Huineng realized there was no escape. This man was a military general made of stern stuff, and Huineng was of delicate build, and there was no further escape. So he hid himself behind a rock and put the robe and bowl down on the ground. And he said, this robe and the bowl is a symbol of the Dharma. If that's what you really want, you can take it away. And this elder monk, he went to pick up the robe and the bowl, and he couldn't. Something happened to him. It wasn't as if the robe and bowl was that heavy. I mean, even a monk's winter robe, is quite light. And this man was an ex-military guy. I mean, he had a lot of power. No, something came over him. He had a sudden conversion, a profound transformation experience, an awakening experience. He suddenly realized he was in the presence of something awesome, something special, something powerful. And he started sweating, and his whole body, he had almost as if he had a convulsion. And he realized, because moments ago, he actually had murderous impulses. He actually thought that this young illiterate imposter has somehow taken our master's robe and bowl away, and it's a disgrace and a scandal. So I am going to show him. But he had a complete change of heart. And at that moment, he sank to the ground, he bowed, and he said, no, I don't come for the robe and bowl. I have come for the Dharma. The Dharma is all I seek. At that moment, Huineng comes out of hiding, stands in front of him, and he says, the Elder Muir, please empty your mind, and before thinking of good and bad, before your parents were born, what is your true face? Before thinking of good and bad, before your parents were born, what is your true face? And that, in the Zen tradition, is called a koan, a riddle, one of those riddles that simply cannot be solved by the intellect. The whole point of the koan is to drive one beyond the intellect into aspects of our consciousness that we normally do not have reach to. And from there, we have the koan tradition in Zen Buddhism. Well, back to the story. The Elder Muir, as I said, had a profound awakening experience. And at that moment, something clicked deep inside him. And all these years of training with the Fifth Patriarch, and he didn't get it. Well, something happened to him just now in front of the Sixth Patriarch. So much so that he bowed to him sincerely, full prostration on the ground, and said, you are my master now. All these years with the Fifth Patriarch, I didn't get the import. I didn't understand what the Dharma is about. But now, just being in your presence has shown me the way. You are my master. Please instruct me further. And then Huineng said, I have not a closed fist. I have told you all there is, and that is all there is to know, and now you know as well. So go back, and I shall in due course emerge as my master had instructed me. And then off he went, and he hid in the wilderness, in the mountains, for 12 long years. He stayed with a band of hunters. He was a vegetarian. He had a very difficult time. The hunters used to hunt fishes and animals, and he would generally, while they all sleep, he would stand guard over their camp. And the legend says that, you know, in the night he would release the fishes, as many as he could, and whatever. And in due course, he came out of hiding. And his discovery is quite another story, which, you know, I'll leave for another occasion, the way he was found out that he was the sixth patriarch. But this story is basically at really the heart of Zen. It has so many opposites. It has so many aspects to it that are intriguing. You know, right at the beginning, we said Zen, you know, in my previous talk, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not relying on words and letters, looking into the human heart, realizing it and becoming Buddha. Well, Huineng was illiterate. This goes to show that it's not just study alone that will get us there. We need to practice. Now, Huineng had obviously intuitively realized something that he wasn't fully aware of. So he needed the master to give him that final guidance to get to that phase. Another aspect to this story is the two verses themselves. Now, I must say, myself included, and most people, when we hear this story, and it's a very moving story, and it's a very powerful story, and it has pointers for all of us, we always obviously side with the winner, don't we? Huineng's verse. How profound, absolute, you know, reality, non-duality, because Huineng's poem is pointing to non-duality. There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. Since from the beginning all is void, shunyata, anatta, where can the dust alight? That is from the absolute position. But what most people don't realize, and my teacher, the Venerable Myokyoni, she was at enormous pains to point it out, that actually one is not superior to the other, one needs the other. Both verses are two sides of the same coin. The second verse is a mirror complementary to the first verse. The first verse is the one that applies to us in training. Those of us who are in training, we do practice daily. We do slowly wipe the mirror clean so that one day there'll be no dust upon it. So that is actually what's called gradual practice. The daily, slowly wiping the mirror clean. However, Huineng was referring to something else. He was referring to what's called sudden enlightenment as opposed to gradual enlightenment. And in Zen, these two strands have actually permeated into the essence of Zen transmission. And we have two basic schools. The two schools being the Rinzai school, which is based on the koan. So in the Rinzai system, you have lots of koans. So I've just mentioned the first koan, which is before thinking of good and bad, before your parents were born, what is your true face? Obviously, you can't have a true face before your parents were born because you weren't born. But nevertheless, that is what the koan is asking us. Some of you might have heard another very famous koan from the great master Hakuin, who lived in the 17th century, and he was the great reviver of Zen Buddhism, because in the 16th, 17th century, Zen was kind of becoming quite corrupt and ossified and politicized and all sorts of problems. And this great master single-handedly revived the whole of Zen, and he actually revived the koan tradition. And his famous koan is, "You've all heard the sound of two hands clapping. Tell me the sound of one hand clapping." That's the other famous koan. And the Rinzai tradition, which traditionally was associated with the warrior classes, the samurais, quite often Rinzai Zen is referred to as the samurai or warrior Zen. And the there's another version of Zen called Soto Zen. Soto Zen, there they don't have this kind of subtle, sudden, gradual approach. In the Soto Zen, every moment of practice itself is enlightenment. In the Rinzai Zen tradition, we practice koans, we do training, we do this to attain enlightenment, so to speak. Whereas in the Soto Zen, the emphasis is every moment of practice is itself enlightening. So perhaps one could say it's less goal-orientated. Sitting zazen, which is the Zen term for sitting meditation, is itself enlightening. And it's a different of emphasis, and it suits different personalities. And some great masters have trained in both traditions. Now, as it happens, although the Soto tradition talk primarily of just sitting, there's a technical term for it in Japanese called shikantaza. Shikantaza is just sitting. So you're not even counting your breath or chanting a mantra or focusing on your koan, or koans, by the way, all koans ultimately break down to a simple question. What am I? Who am I? That's all. That's what the true face means. The true face actually means, what am I? Who am I? And, you know, in the Zen tradition, whether we do Soto Zen or Rinzai Zen, continuously there is this awareness that observes, but also beyond observing, that questions, what is this? Something happens to me in life and I have a reaction. What is this? To whom does this happen? To whom does this thought occur? There was a great Indian sage, the great Sri Ramana Maharshi from South India, perhaps one of the greatest sages from the Hindu tradition. But he, like Hui Neng, was also enlightened very early on, actually, while he was only 16 years old. And his main strand was, whenever people would go to question him anything, the first question he would send back to them, and who is the one who asks this question? Find that one. Who is the one who talks right now? Who's the one who is listening right now? Without any effort. These words are being said right now, and all of you understand English. And without any effort on your part, the words are being heard, and perhaps some sense is being made. Instantly, without you thinking about it. Who is that one? Who is the one who is aware of the feet on the floor? The voice. I can hear a bird outside my window now. It's all happening. Who is that one? Who am I? So that's another form of intense meditation. It's not suitable for everybody. It's pretty hard work. And if you do that meditation really properly, you do literally sweat beads of sweat. It's so we have the Koan tradition and we have the two different traditions. The Rinzai tradition comes from a great Chinese master called Master Linshi, who in Linshi Yishuan, who in Japanese is called Rinzai. Don't forget, the Japanese cannot pronounce all the syllables we have in the West. So Linshi becomes Rinzai. And the Soto tradition came from another great Japanese master, Master Dogen, who is perhaps one of Japan's greatest philosophers. Ultimately, deep down, like Theravada, like Mahayana, it's all Buddhism. It all points to the same root. But, different people obviously have different inclinations. Some people have the energy to ask that question, who am I, who am I? Or some people repeatedly go back to the breath, or some people simply sit in like Vipassana style, pure sitting. And Vipassana is quite similar to the Soto Zen of pure sitting. So we have all these sort of practices. Now, I'm going to give a few points, hinters for practice. Obviously, one of the biggest obstacles to our practice, whether it's Zen or Theravada or Mahayana or Tibetan Buddhism, whatever, the biggest practice is obviously lack of awareness. Sometimes we run on autopilot, don't we? And And even those of us who have been doing the practice for many years, that autopilot, it doesn't disappear, especially when there's an emotional reaction to something I do not like. It seems to bring out all the negative qualities in us, doesn't it? I mean, obviously, everything is going swimmingly and lovely, everything is wonderful, it brings out the best in us, doesn't it? But put a man under stress and we shall see what he's really made of. In my particular case, driving is a sad example. Driving is quite stressful for most of us, and nowadays it's very stressful. And I sort of get a bit impatient if somebody is doing bad things like cutting you up or driving recklessly or this or that. It sort of, certainly irks me and makes me irritable. And if I'm having a busy day and, I'm looking forward to going home and it's lovely and sunny afternoon and I'm planning to sit with the family in the garden and have a nice cup of tea and I'm being delayed and held up in the traffic lights again, those little fires, they rear their ugly heads again. So for me, a lot of my practice is actually in the car because that is one of my weak points. That's one of my energy fissure lines where the energy sort of dissipates, and part of the training is transforming that energy dissipating in a negative manner and actually having patient endurance and sitting with that uncomfortable feeling of irritation, irksomeness, anxiety. Oh God, I'm going to be so late. It's going to get dark by the time all that. You know what I'm talking about. Well, one of the exercises that our teacher recommended, and it's very instructive to do this, is every time we detect in our awareness these little fires, the irritations, the impatiences, the petty slights, why did he say, how could he say this to me? All those little things. Why don't we carry some paper clips, small paper clips in one pocket? And every time, and have say like 30 or 40 paper clips in your left pocket. And every time you notice one of these irritations, what we call the little fires, transfer that paper clip to the right pocket. See how quickly all the paper clips disappear into the right pocket. Now, when we were first asked to do this exercise, I actually thought I did very well because I had about 25 paper clips in my pocket. And after 3-4 hours, I only transferred about 2 paper clips. So when my teacher asked me about it, I very proudly said to her, "Oh, I only transferred 3 paper clips. I've been very mindful." "Really now, Diane, why don't you do the practice again?" So this was after a few weeks of the practice. And I found to my shock, actually, that within 2 hours, 20 paper clips had been transferred from one pocket to the other. Clearly, with the practice, the awareness develops and one catches oneself quicker before the fires fully erupt. You know how it is. The little fires, we don't pay any attention to them because, we're not even aware of them. We only tend to notice the big fires, don't we? My big raging problem, my greed for cakes, or my alcoholism, or this or that, or my whatever it is, my tendency to gossip, my tendency to, I don't know, backchat and whatever. We all have our foibles, and in Western psychological terms, we call it the shadow. We all like to present a nice image of ourselves to everybody else, don't we? That's what we call the persona in Jungian psychology, which is very much worth going into, actually. There's a lot of things worth learning there. But we all like to present ourselves as a nice, decent, all-rounded gentleman or gentle or a civilized lady or all that kind of stuff. But of course, underneath us lurk all these things. And the more honest we are, the more we'll come to recognize them. And that's the whole point of the training, actually. The practice starts to bring up all this stuff from deep, deep within. And stress brings it out very, very quickly, doesn't it? So one of the exercises we can do is the paper clip exercise. Just little paper clips. And if we like to think of ourselves as very nice, all-rounded people, just do that exercise. And if you're truly honest, we'll find out how many times we kind of lose, it a little bit, just little fires. And the whole irony is if we don't pay attention to those little fires, the big fires will sweep us over. And we end up doing crazy things, especially in midlife, the midlife crisis, and all kinds of things you read about in the newspapers. Somebody very respectable, somebody very spiritual, profoundly religious, doing things completely out of order, sometimes actually doing criminal things. Well, that's what happens when the little fires were never paid any attention to. And on that, let me tell you a little poem from the Zen tradition. On a lotus leaf sits a frog, deep in meditation. You know how frogs are when they sit? They almost look like they're in meditation, don't they? On a lotus leaf sits a frog, deep in meditation, eyes closed, shoulders straight, deep in meditation. Behind him rears up a big snake. But on the lotus leaf sits the frog, eyes closed, deep in meditation. Does he know? Does he not know? The snake behind him. Watch out! Watch out! Beware! You know, it's happened to me. I've come from a lovely retreat where I have had a few experiences, and then you come home, and obviously there is a sense of inflation, and that's to be very wary of. The practice can make us inflated. We think we're acquiring wisdom, knowledge, power, shakti, all that kind of stuff. And that's when that old snake gobbles us up. And I remember my early first retreats. I would come home, I would have this evangelical, born again kind of energy. So much that I would try to ram Buddhism down the throats of my poor wife and my little children. They didn't want to hear any of that. Certainly not my little children. But, you know, and I would get into arguments and I would think, why are people not listening to me? I'm trying to help them. Well, that's what happens. You sit in meditation, things happen, and then suddenly, next moment, and we are actually warned when we come back from a retreat, especially those of us that are driving, we're actually warned, be very careful, because that energy has been conserved in the body for these 5, 6, 7 days of the retreat, and it looks for a way to come out in any way possible. And invariably, it comes out with other people, either a subtle sense of superiority, or I know what's good for you, I've got to tell you, even though you don't want to listen to me. Which is why, by the way, you know, in the Christian tradition, there's that lovely saying, do unto others what you would want others do unto you. Yes, the Christian tradition, do unto others what you would want others do unto you. Well, in Buddhism, we actually have the opposite of that. We actually have the negative version. Do not do unto others what you would not want others do unto you. We actually emphasize the negative. Why is that? Because what I think is good for you may not be good for you at all. I mean, that's what the Crusaders thought, didn't they? Going around killing people, converting the infidels. That is what the conquistadores did, didn't they, when they went to South America and wiped out the whole Amazonian tribes. That is what happened in North America. The American Red Indian was wiped out, annihilated. They were thought to be savages because people thought from Europe, they'll go and do them good. So one thing I've learned over the years is rather than trying to be a do-gooder, and do-gooders, they're frightfully boring, to be honest with you. Rather than being a do-gooder, why not let me work on myself and purify myself and empty my own heart? Because if the other one needs my help, they'll come to me. They'll ask me for it. And it's actually very denigrating and denying the dignity of the other when we try to rush in heedlessly telling them what's good for them. Look around the world. All these people trying to do so many good things, and in the process, they actually cause more damage. And on that very note, let me tell you a lovely story from the great Ajahn Mahabua. The Ajahn Mahabua was one of the great forest teachers in the Thai Theravadin tradition. And he told a lovely story to my own teacher, He's a lot older than my own teacher, who's a lot older than me, and she's no longer, sadly. But Ajahn Mahabua tells a lovely story of a young monk meditating in the forests, and he's very seriously meditating. And you know what happens when you meditate for long hours? Sometimes you can go into dreamlike fantasy imagery, vivid imagery states. You're not meditating at all, actually. You're kind of semi-awake. You're not fully sleeping. But anyway, this young man suddenly, in his deep meditation, sees this most beautiful golden ball shining in front of him. And he felt, my goodness, I've never seen anything like this. The ball was almost, it was, a nice big ball, about the size of a football, and it was almost so alluring, he felt he had to have it. And so he tried to reach it. It was just in front of him, a few feet. He tried to reach out for it from his meditation posture, but he couldn't get it. Just at the last moment, the ball jumped a little bit further away. So he gets up from his meditation sitting, and he chases the ball. And the ball goes this way and that way, hides under the undergrowth, and this chase goes on for a while. Eventually, the ball clambers up a tree, and it goes up the tree, and it goes up the big branches, and the monk follows in suit, and it goes further up the branches to the little branches, and it goes further and further, very, very high up into the tree. And the monk also follows. And suddenly, when the monk has got to one of the highest little branches, and the branch is so swaying under his weight and about to break, he fully comes to his senses, and he realizes where he is, how high he is, and how perilous he is. And it was in the middle of the night. Alarmed, frightened out of his brains, he starts shouting to the other monks, but he was deep in the middle of the forest doing a solitary nightly sitting. Nobody could hear him. And there he remained all morning because he was scared to come down. He was stuck there. Eventually, the following morning, the other monks in his monastery group realized he was missing, and they realized he had gone to the forest the night before. So they went and looked for him, and eventually they found him, and he came down. And Ajahn Mahabua, at the end of the story, he gives a lovely chuckle, and he goes, serves that monk right. He had no right to be chasing that golden ball, a monk at that. Isn't that what we do? We chase our gold balls, don't we? He had no right to be beguiled by that ball, and even more foolish was he to chase it. Well, we do the same thing, don't we? Oh, if only I change my jobs, I'll be more fulfilled. I've had enough with my wife, been with her 30 years. Time to look elsewhere. Or maybe it's a new sports car, or maybe it's a new holiday, or maybe it's a new hobby. And, like the little child, what happens to a little child when you give it a shiny new red sports car toy? Well, it plays with it for a few days, and then it's bored, and then it wants another one and another one. Well, I don't think we've moved much further ahead of that little child, because we do the same things. Even those of us in the practice, it's so subtle. We have to keep on reminding ourselves, that actually it's the heart that needs fulfillment. It's not external objects that we chase one after another. It's the heart that needs fulfillment. And quite often the heart seems to jump out of us and drapes itself in a veil, in a shimmering golden veil that is so alluring, that is so inviting and beguiling that we forget. And as the great psychologist Jung used to say, and there's another one the gods have carried away. When somebody who should know better, those of us in midlife who should be a bit more reflective, who should know better what's appropriate and what's not, we get carried away, and we see it all around. And it's very important that we kind of look at these things with the right kind of key, the right eye, because one of the problems, and this is what causes a lot of problems within the training, is we misunderstand, we misappropriate the Buddha's message for my message as it suits me. It's my practice. And quite often we put the practice in a separate compartment to our life, don't we? So for instance, we have like our work, one compartment. We have the family, second compartment. We have our friends and hobbies, third compartment. And oh, yes, a bit of practice. And you know, the practice initially is a separate thing. Actually, when the practice becomes incorporated into all aspects of our life, at work, at home, with family and friends, even in our hobbies, that's when the practice is becoming more integrative, more wholesome, rather than a practice as a separate thing. And I'd like to just finish with a little sort of story from a great master, Master Hakuin, who I mentioned before. He was a very serious monk. He became a monk from the age of 12 or 13. And, you know, he was special because he cared for the lay people just as much as his monastics. A lot of the great masters, they taught their monks a lot, but this particular one was particularly fond of simple village people who would go to him, and he would tell them stories, usually do some calligraphy, which if you happen to have one of his calligraphies is worth millions, by the way. And he would do drawings for them. And he was very funny as well. A lot of his drawings are incredibly humorous, almost cartoon-like. And I was joking with Bhante the other day, you know, humor and humility, they're essential ingredients in the training, in a practice. If humor and humility are missing, one is a bit too serious and a bit too, you know, up their own head, so to speak. So anyway, this great priest, master, he lives in a simple little temple, broken down, dilapidated temple, and he has a few monks training with him. It so happened that near him there was a village, and in this village, a young girl got pregnant with somebody her parents did not approve of. This man was not high ranking. I think he was a market stall holder or something. And the girl knew that if she divulged who the father was, her parents would not take it well, and they might actually cast her away. So she's pregnant, and you know, eventually her parents confront her. Who is it? Who is the father? And in her desperation, she can't think of anybody else. She thinks of this Master Hakuin. And so obviously the parents are outraged because they think here's a holy man who is behind the scenes very naughty. So the parents, the whole village, they all gather up, you know, a day before they're all paying him respects and taking food and offerings. And a day after they all go there with evil intention, and they have a big sort of go at him and say, how dare you, all this kind of stuff, you know, you are a fake, and etc. And they actually take the little one with them, and they dump the baby with him. It's your baby, you look after it. Can you imagine what that was for the monk, a young monk in his 30s? Can you imagine? A lot of his monks were so shocked, they left him. Only one or two his true disciples remained with him, and there was the little baby. He had to provide food for it. So what did he say to those people as they finished their charge? He simply said, is that so? Is that so? And he doesn't add any more fuel to the flame. He doesn't get into an argument or defending himself. He just says, is that so? And they leave, leaving the baby behind. For the next year, this poor master brings up the baby himself as best as he could. He had to go to faraway neighboring villages to get milk for the baby, because obviously the local villagers would not give him anything. And he carried on with this practice, and he looked after the baby. And he had only one or two monks left with him to help him with the broken down, dilapidated temple repairs and looking after the baby. Anyway, a year later, that young man who was the father had made it in life, and he became a very successful merchant. And the girl also could not hide her shame and disgust anymore. She felt remorseful. She felt she couldn't keep it within her anymore. And also the circumstances were right, because she felt, now that my lover has made it, maybe my parents would accept him now. So she goes and tells her parents the truth. The whole village comes trundling along to Master Hakuin. Your Lordship, forgive us, forgive us. We did not know, we have sinned, Your Lordship. All that. What does Master Hakuin say in the end? Is that so? They take the baby away. Is that so? I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dayan. Now, if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself and address any questions that you might have to them.
Great, no questions.
Great.
Hurrah! Stunned into silence.
Neha, yes, Neha.
Thank you, Doctor. That was, there were a lot of very good stories in there, which actually, you know, make you think about the way you're living your life. So thank you for that insight and profound wisdom. My question to you is more around, you know, all these things that you talked about, they resonate instantly with you, but then you go back into your, you know, usual life, and I suppose you know, none of us is holy to attain that kind of wisdom and actually apply that to our lives. So my question to you is, you know, how do we are there any tips that you could share with us to kind of help us, I suppose, be better human beings, and practice some of the things that you shared about through these stories? You know, none of us is, or at least I can just speak for myself, you know, I'm nowhere close to attaining nirvana or any of that, you know. So you know, like, could you share certain tips? I mean, I guess for you, looking back when you started the practice of being aware, besides that clip practice, which I thought was very good, is there anything else that you could share?
Sure. Of course, there was something I actually had written down in my notes, but I forgot to mention it. One of the things you can do is, obviously, one of the big things we do in practice is awareness and being wholehearted and having no resistance and giving ourselves into it, jump into it. So why not have these little phrases written down on your desk, on your desk in the office, or have a little pad open, or on your wallet. When you open the wallet, have a little yes. I say yes to life. So you open the wallet and there is a little sticker, wholehearted, jump into it. Yes? Little tips like that. Because we all want to do the right thing, don't we? And that's why we're here. And it is difficult. Of course it's difficult. And it's very honest of you to acknowledge. And that's a good start, the honesty, the basic honesty, because actually the real trouble is people are very dishonest and they would rather not want to see. So awareness is the big thing. And anything that reminds us to be aware again and again and again is the practice. Yeah. So that's a little tip I can give you. That's what I do personally. I have little stickers in my wallet. At work, let's say I'm right now, because of COVID, I don't see too many patients face to face. I do telephone consultations, yeah? But even when I see patients face to face, on my desk, next to my laptop or computer, I have a tiny little notepad, which nobody can see. And in it, it says, listen, listen. So one of the things we do in life is, before you've even finished saying, I've blurted my mouth open, haven't I? I'm not even listening to my patient. So I make a note, listen. Yes? So these are pointers, that's all. Whatever works for you, but to me, that is powerful. Now, this kind of thing is okay if it's things like reminding myself to be aware, reminding myself to be courteous, politeful, at work, not to take the bait, somebody accuses you of something. If you have that, caution. Yes? Caution. I actually write in my bits, I have there's silence, because inner silence, yeah? Because what happens is somebody at work is saying something, or my wife says something, or whatever. And rather than listening to that person, an automatic chain reaction goes on inside. Hence, I say, listen, silence, caution. And so you can actually have a little mantra for you. Ajahn Sumedho used to, the great Theravadin master, used to have a mantra. He used to say, Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. Yeah? Inhalation, Bud, exhalation, Do. So when you're walking around, why don't you do that? Buddha, Buddha, silence, yes, yes, yes to the fires, all the little resistance. Let's say it's, it's 4:30 at work. I'm with a patient. I might have mentioned this before, and it's a lovely sunny afternoon. This actually happened to me a few occasions. That's why I can tell you about it. Not very proud of it, but it's true. It's 4:30. It's a lovely sunny day. It's summer. I'm planning to get away in 10 minutes, get home a bit early, put my feet up in the garden and chill out with my kids. And this patient starts on something terrible. And I suddenly realize this is going to go beyond 5 o'clock. Yeah. And rather than listening to the tragedy that the patient is saying, this happened to me when I was younger. I'm caught up in my own little bubble. And all I want to do is go home. And I'm kind of just in a very subtle way looking at my watch. And the patient saw it. And she said, "Doctor, are you in a hurry?" Which really embarrassed me. But she was so kind, she understood. She said, "Doctor, I am taking a long time." Yes, but you see, these are the secret little agendas we have. We don't listen to the other. We are so caught up in ourselves. Even when somebody is saying something really tragic, how often do we do that? A friend rings you. You want to go shopping with your best buddy, but you've got plans to go to Oxford Street, and a friend rings you in a crisis. Your immediate reaction, "Oh, not now." That kind of thing. Those are very difficult to pick up, very difficult, because they're so subtle. As for the big fires, the boss humiliated me and I'm going to shame. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And I replay it in my mind all day. The wife is asking me, "What's wrong with you, dear? Oh, it's nothing. Leave me alone." Those are the big fires. Those require harder work. But as I said, in order for one to deal with those fires, it's the little ones that have to be paid attention to. And then we can start tackling the big issues, whatever they are. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Neha.
I just saw a message, Bhante. Somebody has typed a message.
Yes. So Shriyani is asking, what are the differences between one Zen and Theravada Buddhism, and which is another talk altogether, Shriyani. And also Tibetan Buddhism and Zen.
Oh my goodness! I'm not an authority on anything, Bhante. As I said, first of all, they're all Buddhism. Yeah, they're all Buddhism, and they all start with the basics: the Four Noble Truths, the three fires, the three signs of being. The Noble Eightfold Path. They're all the same. It's just differences of emphasis. Yeah. So, for instance, you could divide religion into, in the Indian tradition, you have 4 different yogas. You have what's called Bhakti Yoga, which is a devotional strand. In Buddhism, in Japan, especially in China, you have what's called the Pure Land Buddhism, and they're the devotional types. They don't do as much sitting or as much analysis or whatever. They just chant one of their chants, Namu Amita Butsu, and they're of a devotional type. So they're deeply devoted. Then there are those who do what's called karma yoga. Karma is the way of action. So these are people who do good things, charitable things, and they express their spirituality through their work and their charitable missionary. So they think of others. Then there are what's called the jnana or prajna yoga, which is the yoga of knowing. So there are different strands to an individual. And I suppose these different strands appeal to different people. So in a nutshell, what is the difference? So one of the big difference, for instance, is the koan system. Yeah. So where you have these ridiculous riddles, which make no sense. But then again, in Theravada, you also have koans when you meditate on the body. Who am I? What am I? That is kind of a koan. So it's just difference of emphasis. Zen has a particularly Taoist flavor because it sort of mingled with the Chinese system. So it has a Taoist flavor. And Zen in particular tries to be not too much bogged down with philosophy and doctrine. And yet Zen itself has produced the most volumes of doctrine itself. So, and Tibetan Buddhism, I don't know an awful lot, although I do have Tibetan Buddhist friends, and actually Geshe Gyaltsen, who sadly is no longer, was one of my great teachers who I used to go for guidance until he passed away. In Tibetan Buddhism, which is also called Vajrayana, it's a tantric type of Buddhism, which has deep symbolism and imagery, and their meditations are a different type. It's much more visualization meditation, where you have these things called mandalas, these beautiful Tanka paintings called mandalas with mathematical symbols in it. And mandalas are symbols of wholeness. And you can actually enter the sacred space of a mandala and imagine you are a tutelary deity and you invoke the spirit. So it's a different approach. But obviously it all starts with the very basic awareness. And the Theravada school is therefore the groundwork for everything, because the Theravada school repeatedly emphasizes awareness, awareness, observe all that arises to come to be and to cease to be arising. And other things, they're all props, so to speak. Don't forget, ultimately, Buddhism itself is the great prop that has to be dropped off. Because if you sort of stink too much of Buddhism, well, then you stink too much of Buddhism. So if you meet a 6-year-old, you should be able to talk to your 6-year-old like a 6-year-old. So all these things are props, and they have different emphases. And some of these emphases can be quite profound and quite elaborate and whatever. But ultimately, they do point to a similar kind of background. Another example I'll give you is in a future talk, I'll be talking about the bull herding pictures. The image of a herdsman and his bull. And that is supposed to be a very Zen thing. It arose in China in the 10th, 11th century, a metaphor for spiritual development through the process of herding a bull. If you look at that, and the great Sri Lankan commentator Walpola Rahula, he wrote many books, but one of his books, he actually traces the metaphor of bull herding in ancient Theravadian texts from herding an elephant. Exactly the same metaphor. So even something that's supposed to be as original as bull herding in Zen has actual roots in Theravadin. So actually, when you study it, and it's important, I think, that you do go out of your tradition. If you're a Theravadin, it is actually helpful to look at Mahayana texts. And if you're a Mahayanist, it is actually important to look at Theravadin texts. Personally, I think the basics, the Theravadin basics are fundamental primer work for everybody. But when you actually start looking at it, it's a bit like a mountain. A mountain has many sides, and depending on which aspect of the mountain you're approaching from, you will see that side. Yes, and if you're foolish, you'll think to yourself, oh, this is but the only side, but clearly not. A mountain has various sides and perspectives. A statement I like to say is, a man is like a mountain. A mountain has many perspectives. It has many sides. And depending on each perspective, others will view that man accordingly. But who is this man who is so many perspectives and none in the end? I think hopefully that answers that one.
I think it does very well. Then we have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about the Zen. I don't know whether one would call him a master, Ryokan.
Who?
Ryokan.
Ryokan. He's a great Zen poet and master. Yes. I actually have a lot of his books. Yes.
Yes, and he was also, he was a great Zen master. He's written a lot of stuff, but he was also an alcoholic.
I wouldn't say he was an alcoholic. I wouldn't say he was an alcoholic. He was fond of wine, and many of the Zen masters, don't forget, it's a cultural thing. Okay. So, for instance, in Theravada Zen, you don't smoke, you don't drink, yeah? In Mahayana Zen, and don't forget, it's also cultural. So in China, drinking wine was very cultural, the Taoists, the Confucianists, and I think the admonition from the Buddha is do not get intoxicated. Now, if a small glass of wine gets you totally hammered, then you shouldn't even touch a glass of wine. But, you know, those of us that have grown up in the West, you know, it is, if it's part of the culture, that's okay. There's no need to, but no, Ryokan was fond of wine, and many of his great poems where some of it were written after he had a little tipple or two. But no, he's not the eccentric that you are thinking of. The true eccentric, the guy who divides opinions, is Master Ikkyu. He too wasn't an alcoholic. Apparently he was a bit of a womanizer. But anyway, Ryokan, yes, and you'll find that quite a few of the Zen masters, you know, culturally speaking, it was, and likewise the Tibetan Buddhists as well. As you know, a lot of the Tibetan Buddhists are meat eaters, and in Zen, traditionally, though the monks predominantly eat vegetarian food, but when they are invited to patrons' houses, like the Buddha, they eat whatever is offered to them and drink what is offered to them.
Yeah, the only reason I brought that up was because in sort of the comparison between Theravada and Zen, it speaks a lot about the artistry that the Zen tradition has, and the sort of the connectedness that sort of these masters have with the heart. And of course, they call it an obsession, but of course, the focus that Zen Buddhism has on the facts of sunyata, while Theravada Buddhism might have more through insights into sunyata. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's quite simply that Theravada is called anatta and Mahayana is called shunyata. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, we're playing around with words. As you know, Bhante, the experience itself cannot be translated into words. Yeah, even Buddha couldn't do that. Yeah, but we're talking philosophy now. So anatta, shunyata, the void, it's all the same. And as with all these things, reality cannot be broken down into tiny little atoms that we talk about. If we do that, it will be here for the rest of eternity, because reality is eternity, and it is zillions of atoms. And as I said, the mountain can be approached from so many different aspects. So anatta is no I, shunyata is also no I. And shunyata, a lot has been written about, and quite often I feel a lot of it that has been written about, I'm not so sure, you know, those that wrote it, but there is very little that can ultimately be said about it. It's like saying, what is the enlightening experience? We can only point fingers to it. But one example of shunyata, I would give you an example, is I had some problems with one of my very close relatives a few years ago, who was being very destructive, shall we say, to both my family and my extended family. And this man is a very powerful man, and for quite a while in my younger days, I lived in sort of fear of this man. So one day, you know, many years ago, I went to my teacher for some guidance about this. Venerable Miyakuni, how to deal with this very troublesome man who is got severe personality issues, and you know, he likes to wreck homes and mess people's lives up and play the power game and status game and blah blah blah. And I know that I should have compassion for him because he's one of my very close relatives, and yet he's a tricky punter. And so my teacher, I'll never forget, she said, Udayan, the first thing you do is empty the tummy. Empty the tummy. What does that mean? Have no reactions within. Yes, empty, the empty heart. Because if you don't have that empty heart, things will not be reflected as they are, and no compassion will ever arise, because you'll be stuck in your own bubble. And that way, and then she gave me further instructions. She said, once you've emptied your heart, you're not going to take the bait and get sucked in by his shenanigans. You'll see him clearly as he is, and you'll deal with him. And then you say to him, look, this is how things are. If we're going to carry on in our relationship, This is how things are, and I say to you clear. And then she further told me, he is clearly not your father figure, is he? For that you have the great father figure, Buddha. So he's just a sentient being, deserving of compassion. But it all starts with emptying your own prejudices, baggage, hurts, slights, insults, your shadow, in other words. Because if that is there, your reaction will never be correct. So perhaps that is a nice way to explain shunyata, a non-philosophical explanation that can be applied in daily life. Yes?
Yes, thank you then. Max, you have a question. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Hello, old boy Max. How are you doing?
You have to unmute yourself, Max. Max, please unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Lovely.
Hi, Max.
Now? So I've just unmuted myself. I love the metaphor with the frog and the snake. The story of the frog and the snake, and the frog was on the lily pad and the snake was behind him. And you say, you know, we're often not aware of what's behind us.
Yeah.
So we have this sort of idea we're enlightened and we come back from a retreat or something, but we're still blissfully unaware that there's things going on. I think you've answered a lot of this question actually already, when Nihal was you know, obviously talking to you about this. How are you more aware of what's behind you in this sense?
That is something that happens.
Yeah.
Awareness is not your property or my property. It is, and with effort, with the right kind of effort, it does develop. It does develop. It's not a tool. As I said, those tips that I gave,
yeah, absolutely. Well, this is what I'm saying. It was very
that's the kind of tips.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, simple little things, like another tip I can give you. We all think all the time, don't we? Quite often we think about something that doesn't apply in this correct moment. So as another example, as you're walking along the road, from here to, for the next 200 yards, think of only something, just one thing, an issue at work, an aspect of doctrine. Don't allow your mind to waver. So whilst you're walking, you're still training. Yeah? Okay? And then you cross the road, now switch to another thing. Yeah? So you're actually doing exercises for the mind. So attention is important. And
being within the moment, in a sense. Being aware of the moment, an awareness of the moment.
Well, that will come naturally. I mean, look, you do it in your sleep, don't you? When you're sleeping and it's cold, who's the one who turns the quilt? It's there. It's all there. Problem is, I get in the way of it.
Yeah, very much.
And rather than being in this moment right now, I mean, I want to think about something else, or this or that. I mean, actually, you know, questions are important. They are, but quite sometimes the questioning itself either reveals the answer or takes us away from the answer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good. All
right, thanks, Max.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Dil, you wanted to ask a question?
Can you hear me, Dr. Jay?
Yeah.
Hello, I can hear you.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to ask you, because you have experience of both practices and you know, and read about Theravada as well. So, and you know about the practices of the Amaravati tradition. So I just wanted to ask whether, what has been your experience? So most of the retreats that you do with the Amaravati group of monks and nuns, they're mainly always Vipassana, and it's about, you know, do the Satipatthana and looking at, to see, you know, rising and passing away, like how you do Satipatthana. But there was one retreat which I did with a monk who had recently gone to America. So he's younger than the other very senior nuns and monks who do retreats. He was maybe about coming on to 50, and he had just started a monastery. And he was one of those people who didn't kind of go into, he was very simplistic in his thinking, because he was more concentrating over bare attention. And for him, that had been the path more than all the sort of the more detailed workings of the mind that most of the other people had got involved in. So when he did a retreat, I think it was a 7-day retreat, and the first time that I had done a retreat, I found it was very different, because it was more like what you were saying. It's about looking at the heart and opening of the heart and keeping this principle. So it was about bare attention. And unlike normally where we are allowed to ask questions in sessions and there are very detailed interactions and your own experience and, guidance on meditation, it was all about bringing your mind to the present moment. And he said only for one day he left. So he really had us for 7 days, not speaking to anybody, but also being very mindful. But this question of all the time, letting go and keeping still and keeping the mind. So it was very blissful. And when we finished the retreat, we had experienced states of mind that we normally hadn't. We came back and the drive was very long. And the next day, and the weather was very wet. And so I had to take an antihistamine. And probably with the car drive, I was a little drowsy as well. But when I came back and I had to do something, it was late in the night, I found that the sense of, oneness, this spaciousness, was so overwhelming, which is that I wasn't as mindful as I would in doing some things which I was doing with some boiling water and with a towel and trying to steam myself because my sinuses were blocked. And of course, it struck my hand and my water got, the boiling water fell and I got burned. And then I realized that in this spaced out condition that I wasn't as mindful. So is in your experience, when sometimes you become very holy when you come back and, you want to tell everybody how wonderful it was and, inappropriately kind of teach the Dhamma, have you also had that feeling that everything is sort of more spacious and that if you are not very mindful and you relate to it, that you can do things in that state?
Absolutely. And that is the whole point of the poem about on a lotus leaf sits the frog. Yeah. There he is meditating and getting all holy, and behind him something is about to go. That is the very point. Absolutely. Yeah. What happens to us, we have a great sitting, sitting or a retreat, and we have what's called inflation. We get inflated, and it's not even a conscious one, it's a natural unconscious inflation. So one of the things one great teacher says, if you have something good happen to you, go and clean the toilets, go and clean the dustbins, go and scrape the floor, do something to humble yourself, because that energy is accruing within you. It's filling you with spaciousness and oneness and mystical and profound, sublime, all this. And that's when you drop the thing on your foot. Exactly.
And what it makes you do then is to become just you work on yourself, because I experienced real pain and I was given a really awful prognosis, and then you become very mindful and then you do all the rest of the practice and actually your body responds and heals and you do things that are miracles. So I found the opposite also happen, and then I realized that really you can do marvelous things when you really you practice, and every moment when you accept the pain and you surrender to the pain and you do all those things, you could also make healing come very much quicker than what doctors normally say, and avoid things like having to have skin grafts and things like that. So actually the practice, if you're very mindful, there's so much you learn from it.
Yes, absolutely. I find everything else quite okay to deal with. Psychological pain and bitterness and irritation and anger. Do you know what I find the most difficult thing to penetrate? Boredom. Because once you put awareness into boredom, guess what? Boredom disappears, doesn't it?
Yes.
And so I haven't had a chance to study boredom, and it's boredom that alienates us. It's boredom that makes us restless. It's boredom that makes us want to go for another shiny red sports car. And boredom is the secret thief that gets away, because as soon as you put your focus on boredom, you're not bored anymore. So you don't have chance to experiment with boredom, do you? Other things, you can have a chance of dealing with it. So my particular gripe is boredom, because as soon as I've sort of sat, now what is this thing called boredom? Let me get to the bottom of it. Of course, I'm not bored anymore. And the chance has gone again. And then he comes back an hour later, another little patch of boredom. But these all should be taken in a fun, there's a beautiful Zen Japanese word. It's called juge-samai. Juge-samai is two words. Juge is from the Japanese for play, and samai is from the Sanskrit samadhi. The samadhi is the experience of at-one-ment, being at one with what is. Yeah. So juge-samai is the samadhi of play. Now, if life can be treated like everything is a play, a lila, in the Indian phrase lila, it's a divine cosmic play. If we can live like that, and in old formal Japanese, they actually say, he's playing at being sad, he's playing at being happy, he's playing at being suffering. Now that is a high level, the samadhi of play. It's like a fish playfully leaping out of water. On a cold winter's morning, you see the squirrels scuttering around playfully. That's the kind of spirit, that's the energy of nature that we bring to the practice. And in answer to somebody's question previously, what is the difference? In Zen, nature is very, very, very important. Very important. So the Chinese, you see their landscape paintings, and so they want to imbibe within the human being the virtues of nature, because there's a lovely saying in Chinese. The word for dharma is Tao. In the old days, it used to be translated T-A-O. Modern Chinese scholars say Tao, T-A-O. And there's a lovely saying: man obeys the laws of earth, earth obeys the laws of heaven, heaven obeys the laws of the Tao, and the Tao obeys its own inherent law. So we try to incorporate what's up there in the universe around us, and we incorporate those same laws, and we obey, and we live to our true nature. So that it's about a collective. It's not about me and my petty enlightenment. How can I be enlightened if I don't have compassion for others? So it's actually ultimately a simple. And the Dalai Lama goes on about this. He goes, it's not Buddhism I'm trying to talk about. It's simply kindness and compassion and living peacefully together. And that's all that matters. The warmth and beauty of the heart that overflows. And in its overflowing, it can only but touch other people positively.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the
invite.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you so much, Udayan, for answering all the questions.
Pleasure.
Talk and all your lovely stories. You're really having a big fan club now for your storytelling skills.
Thank you. Storytelling is a good thing. Storytelling is a good thing.
Absolutely, and you're quite good at it, I must add.
I love stories, especially for children at all. Well, they are, but there's a lot we grown-ups can learn from. And in Jungian psychology, mythologies and fairy tales are given tremendous import, because a lot of the deep dreams and experiences we have are of a mythological, archetypal nature, which I will mention in another talk in the future.
Thank you so much. Then our next Zen talk will be on the 24th of April. So it is going to be every last Saturday of the month, right? So if you're looking forward to it, now you know what the date is. The details of what the topic will be out just a week before the 24th. So thank you everyone for joining in, and Udayan, especially thank you to you.
And thank you to Bhante for organizing it once again. You're doing a great job single-handedly. So thank you for doing the sturdy work and inviting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. It's getting a bit cloudy, but we have a bit more left. So take care and